First up is the Iron Claw, and this is actually based on a real family, the Von Erich brothers, who were professional wrestlers in the early 80s. Their dad was an early days, entertainment wrestler, and I don't know a ton about that world. Most of what I've absorbed is either through friends or through, other pieces of media about that world. So I had no base info on this family going in, so to watch the drama unfold, and then in the back of my mind to know, oh, this is real, this happened, it was dark. Also, if you went to the beginning of the year and told me that two of the top films for me were, going to be about wrestlers between this and Cassandra, which is about Lucha Libre, I would have been probably a little bit surprised, but, this film really got me, and the performances in it are great. You've got Zac Efron as Kevin Von Erich, who's sort of the linchpin of this family, and he is rocking a hardcore Lord Farquaad haircut. It is truly absurd. Look at him side by side, and also the jawline, they all bulked up for this and to learn the moves, etc. So he plays Kevin Von Erich, who is probably the most grounded of the brothers, it seems like, but who, really is aspiring to get a title belt. And he is certainly aggressively encouraged by his father, who's played by Holt McCannally, who I think is truly a standout and terrifying actor. He plays Fritz Von Erich, their father, who openly ranks his sons, which is fairly dark, and they hold different places in his heart based on how successful they are with their athletic prowess, and he doesn't have space in his mind for anything but them excelling in these areas. So that's the whole therapy session, many therapy sessions to unpack. You've also got Jeremy Allen White and Harris Dickinson and Stanley Simmons as the other brothers. Maura Tierney plays their mother, and then Lily James plays a character called Pam, who ends up, I hope this isn't a huge spoiler, but it's also based on a true story. She and Zac Efron's character get together. So lots of tragedy in this film, and I know we're in holiday season, so this is a hard one to maybe recommend given the timing of it, but it's also a really well done movie. The wrestling feels compelling, and they, I think as somebody who doesn't necessarily watch wrestling on television, etc., and even boxing, which I relate more to because I did martial arts, but wrestling, there's obviously more choreography and performance, and boxing is a little more, and martial arts are fight. And it's not to knock wrestling as a sport because it is clearly a physically demanding thing. There's just also this performance element to it for, televised or in-person, performance wrestling. So anyway, those scenes are really well done because I think if you are not engaged in that world, it can get a little boring, but I think they convey some of the tricks of the trade without giving too much away in a really fascinating way. The dynamic between the brothers plays out well. It's hard to watch, as I said, that's the kind of through line for this film, just because they're pushed so hard and there's inherent rivalry, and the dad is such a strict figure, and also, wrestling is sort of finding its footing in popular culture and all this stuff. And I just really enjoyed the film. Seeing them side by side with the actual Von Erich family, I was like, okay, they're all a little bit shorter then, but the real guys were big, brawny dudes. But, they all clearly packed on muscles for this. Yeah, I just thought it was well done. There are a couple of the more dramatic moments that are kind of capital D drama that they're trying, I think it almost doesn't lose in those points, but I felt like they maybe actually might have been slightly weaker because they felt obligated to include them versus just sort of allowing it to play out. But overall, I still think it's absolutely worth a watch. If you have the emotional bandwidth this holiday season to watch this, I say give it a shot. I'm going to give it a 4.2 out of 5. Next up is a film called American Fiction, and it is the directorial debut of Cord Jefferson, who also wrote it. And it stars Jeffrey Wright as a character called Monk, who is a novelist who has technically published a few times, so it's not that he's a failed novelist or an aspiring one. He's got a modicum of success. He's also teaching, so he's in academia to sort of supplement his income, and he is frustrated by sort of publishers and the greater sort of pop culture society, etc., having this perception of what they think Black authors, creators, artists, etc., should be putting out there and what those voices should sound like, which really gets distilled down to, a gross trope of what they think the experience, should be conveyed as versus, somebody who is actually Black being able to dictate that. So he writes this book as a way to point out how utterly absurd it is. And then, of course, that book becomes successful. And so it is him having to navigate the dichotomy of one, people offering him money for this thing that he thinks is, terrible, and two, having to deal with the people who think this is the second coming of publishing. And most of those people, not people of color. So cringy, painful to watch in a great way sometimes. I think this is where the movie succeeds the most, getting to witness some of these interactions. If you are a person of color especially, you'll feel it. You will feel it in your core. It will hurt you to your bones, but I think it does it so painfully well. The other half of the story is about him dealing with some family considerations, trauma, drama, etc. The cast is rounded out with Tracee Ellis Ross, John Ortiz, Erica Alexander, Leslie Uggams, Adam Brody, Issa Rae, Sterling K. Brown, Miriam Shore, Keith David, and I think the concept of the movie, spectacular. This is based on a book, and so I have not read the thing it is based on, so I can't actually speak to how it is as an adaptation. I think, again, like I said, the stuff about the perceived idea of what a person of color's voice should sound like and a black voice should sound like, and I say voice applying to written or expressed or however, that is very, very successful and very painful, like I said. The film, when it comes to dealing with the family drama side of it, it's a little less successful because just like tonally, it ends up feeling a little all over the place. Like that is a whole different separate movie that I actually would have considered watching, but it just sort of pops in every once in a while into this. And I think maybe there could have been a smoother way to navigate it and weave it in towards like how that is impacting his work. And it does in a kind of broad way, but those were the slightly weaker moments for me. And I think if those had been like a separate film, they would have been stronger. And if it just focused on the sort of commentary behind all of this, I think the idea behind it was to sort of show us him as a person and like grounded, or that, he's not a complete egomaniac or something along those lines. But it just gets a little muddied in those parts. But overall, I think it's a very good movie. It got a little overhyped for me, but I think it's well done. Worth a watch, certainly. Just know that, some parts of it are more successful than others, which is the case with any film. But I'm going to give it a 3.9 out of 5. The next film I have is called Maestro, and it is a biopic about Leonard Bernstein. It is written by, directed by, and stars Bradley Cooper. I'm going to be upfront about this. This movie, absolutely not for me, for a variety of reasons, which I will now go into. So I'm going to address the big thing up front, which is sort of an elephant in the room about it. If you've been following it, there has been extensive talk about how Bradley Cooper had, a lot of prosthetics applied in order to look more like Leonard Bernstein, particularly his nose and his ears. And, part of it being that Leonard Bernstein is a man of Jewish descent. Bradley Cooper is not. And Leonard Bernstein's nose was a little more prominent than Bradley Cooper's. So, they're talking about this transformation, blah, blah, blah. And then he gets on screen and I just go, no, you didn't need to do this. Like, it wasn't necessary. It just feels like you're turning it into a caricature. Like, it doesn't enhance the performance, it feels like. And maybe for him, it helped him get into the character. But it just honestly felt cartoonish and maybe a bit anti-Semitic. A lot anti-Semitic. So from the get-go, I was like, oh no. And then also from the get-go, you could tell that this was just... it was going to be super self-indulgent. I think the Bernstein estate hardcore blessed this film, which fine, I want them to get the blessing. But, it just, it suffered from, a sort of lack of editing in multiple senses. I think the other big challenge I have with this film, and I have this problem with a lot of films now, I'm getting tired of films about creatives because it's really hard to convey, especially geniuses, and putting that in air quotes, it's really hard to convey their, je ne sais quoi on screen because there's a reason they were a genius and excel at what they do. So unless you yourself are a genius, and I'm not at all willing to call Bradley Cooper that, it's hard to capture that and distill it down for an audience. And I don't think this does it at all. So really what you have is a film sort of trying to force feed you and be like, look how talented this person is, instead of being able to successfully show you. So that was my other big problem with the film. I think this is a movie about Leonard Bernstein, yes, but it tries to prominently feature Carey Mulligan as, his wife. And she's just... some of this might come from the Bernstein estate blessing this film and therefore not wanting to go into, the dirty laundry of, for those who don't know, Leonard Bernstein, basically gay, maybe bi, but probably gay, but married a woman, which, sexuality is a spectrum, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not, but it's just... they make it sort of seem like she wasn't aware or she was aware. It doesn't openly address his sexuality, and it flirts with it so much, and it shows plenty of things, and it does say it sometimes, but the characters never speak about it in a way that feels satisfying. And it's like, if you're gonna do this, call it what it is. It dances around it way too much for me. There are some really self-indulgent shots that like just go on too long. People talk about there's like a symphony shot or he's conducting, and that Bradley Cooper spent 6 years training with an actual conductor to try and learn how. It's just like, this was unnecessary because it didn't actually take advantage of the medium of film. So, if I wanted to go to the symphony, I would just go to the symphony. I don't need to, or I'd buy a movie about the symphony. I don't need to watch, like, I don't know. It just, it felt like nobody said no to him or, hey, here's a better idea at any point. Him being Bradley Cooper, playing Leonard Bernstein. It didn't resonate with me. I was really frustrated how her character was so background to him and like subservient at times. I don't know. It was, and also, and this has nothing to do with the film itself. I think one of the other problems is I'm not a huge fan of a lot of Leonard Bernstein's more popular work that we know. West Side Story, not my favorite. Pretty open about that. Also, oh my God, I completely forgot because I watched this film a while ago. At some points, this film tries to take from the style of projects that actual Leonard Bernstein himself had participated in, but it doesn't do it in a way that makes sense. Like, it doesn't introduce, like, you have to be aware already of the achievements of this person for those moments to make sense. And then it does this like Bobo version of them. I guess I'll be open. There's like some tributes to like Broadway or like dance dream sequences that, if you're familiar with, particularly Broadway, like that happens a lot, or, or like early musical films, that happens a lot. They do it in this. I was just like, what's happening here? Like, is this a dream, or is this actually him, or is this like a rehearsal? And, it just, I know some people think it's great and more power to them, but I, in good conscience, can't really recommend this movie. I'm going to give it a 2.8 out of 5. The last film I have this week is called All of Us Strangers, and it stars Andrew Scott, Paul Mescal, Jamie Bell, and Claire Foy, and that's pretty much it. It's a very small, intimate movie, and I saw this a little while back, and it's from writer Andrew Haig, or at least Andrew Haig adapted it. It's based on a novel called Strangers by Taichi Yamada, which I haven't read. But, so I watched the film, and I was like, oh, this is good, and then I went back and I found out it was based on something, and I read the plot of what it is based on. And I was like, I want that movie. That sounds a cajillion times more interesting than what I ended up getting. All of Us Strangers, very uneven film. So the idea behind it is that, Andrew Scott's character lives in this basically empty apartment building in London. Paul Mescal is one of his neighbors, one of his few neighbors. They, end up interacting, and I hope this isn't a huge spoiler, but like getting entangled. There's some pretty steamy stuff in there. So, fans of Hot Priest or fans of normal people, enjoy yourselves. But, I'm not trying to be gross or, but I do appreciate how confident Paul Mescal comes across in this. Like, there's something very seductive about that, and it's part of the character, obviously, but he conveys it really well. And Andrew Scott's is like, at the end of the day, what I came away with this movie is it's sort of a meditation on the evolution of the queer identity, particularly like the male queer identity. And that comes about in this idea that like Andrew Scott ends up having these conversations with his parents, who, we find out died 30 years ago, before he maybe had the opportunity to properly come out. Whether they could be the ghosts of his parents, they could be, his imagination. You'll watch the movie. But, there are some very emotional, really well done scenes that I definitely cried a little bit in it. The romantic part is good. It gets a little tedious, and at the end, it kind of falls apart, which is a bummer because I was positioned to love this movie. And then again, finding out where the original ending is, or the original premise of it, I was like, well, yeah, this is a loose adaptation, I suppose, of that, but okay. But I think Andrew Scott gives a great performance in it. Paul Mescal, seductively good. I think Andrew Scott really, of the two of them, gives a stronger one. He also is given sort of more to do. Jamie Bell and Claire Foy as the parents are great. I think they do a good job of sensitively conveying the confusion and maybe even frustration that these characters would have had based on the time they passed away and all that. It gets a little convoluted, right? But overall, it's got some sad moments in it, and because, like I said, similar to Iron Claw, it can get heavier. So you have the emotional bandwidth to see it. I think particularly like gay men of a certain age are going to resonate a lot with the Andrew Scott character and a lot of the things he had to live through. Younger queer folks might not understand some of the historical context as much. I'm partially referring to like the AIDS crisis and things like that. And I think Paul Mescal's character is a good stand-in for, expressing that. And so, like I said, evolution of the queer identity, particularly the male queer identity. But overall, still good performances. Plot a little, if you are, okay with the idea of this, ambiguity of these conversations, all that stuff, I think you'll appreciate it. I'm going to give it a 3.2 out of 5.